The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Montana, as Eleanor Miller dove behind an empty water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs like a blacksmith's hammer. It wasn't the first time she'd been shot at in 1876, but it was certainly the first time the shooter had been her own husband. "You worthless whore!" Thomas Miller's voice carried across the main street, slurred with whiskey and hatred. "Show your face!" Eleanor pressed her back against the wooden trough, feeling splinters dig into her palms. 3 years of marriage had brought her to this hiding from a drunken husband who believed rumors over his own wife's word. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not with half the town watching from windows and doorways. "Mr. Miller!" Sheriff Walton's authoritative voice cut through the commotion. "Put that gun down, or so help me, I'll lock you up till kingdom come!" Eleanor peered around the edge of the trough to see Thomas swaying on his feet, his once handsome face contorted with rage and drink. The sheriff approached cautiously, hand hovering over his holster. "She's been laying with that cattle driver," Thomas spat. "Everyone knows it." The accusation made Eleanor's stomach turn. The cattle driver, James Holden, had merely helped her carry supplies when Thomas was too drunk to assist. One smile, one thank you, and the rumors had started like wildfire. Sheriff Walton managed to disarm Thomas, though not without a struggle that left both men covered in the street's dust. "Mrs. Miller," the sheriff called, "best you find somewhere to stay tonight. I'll keep him locked up till he sobers." Eleanor stood shakily, aware of the eyes following her every move. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, watched from the general store porch, her lips twisted in a smirk. The blacksmith and his apprentice paused their work to stare. Even old Mrs. Hammond, who'd once been kind to Eleanor, shook her head in disapproval. "The cheated wife," someone whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "Poor Thomas," another voice added. "No man deserves such humiliation." Eleanor straightened her spine and walked with as much dignity as she could muster toward the boarding house at the edge of town. She had $3 to her name, enough for perhaps 2 nights' lodging. After that, she had nowhere to go. "Mrs. Miller!" A deep voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned to find Luke Grayson, the newest ranch hand at the Broken Spur, sitting atop his chestnut stallion. She'd seen him around town a few times since his arrival 2 months ago. He tipped his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed composure. "Mr. Grayson," she acknowledged, desperate to escape the public scrutiny. "I heard the commotion." His eyes moved past her to where the sheriff was escorting Thomas to the jailhouse. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride, Mr. Grayson." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you'll excuse me." He dismounted in one fluid motion, standing a respectful distance away. "Mrs. Miller, the Broken Spur has a small cabin for guests. It's empty now. You'd be welcome to use it until—" He trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish the sentence. Eleanor hesitated. The offer was tempting more privacy than the boarding house, and likely no charge. But it would only feed the rumors. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. Mrs. Calloway would be there," he added, referring to the ranch owner's wife. "No one could question your propriety." Something in his earnest expression made Eleanor reconsider. She had few options, and the thought of walking past the whispering townsfolk to the boarding house was almost unbearable. "I accept your offer, Mr. Grayson." "Thank you." He nodded once, then offered his hand to help her onto his horse. She hesitated only briefly before allowing him to boost her up. As he swung into the saddle behind her, maintaining a proper distance between their bodies, she caught the scent of leather, sun-warmed cotton, and something distinctly masculine. "Don't worry about what they say," he said quietly as they rode past the onlookers. "Most folks in this town wouldn't recognize the truth if it bit them on the nose." For the first time that day, Eleanor felt something other than fear or shame. It wasn't quite hope she'd learned not to trust hope, but perhaps it was the faintest stirring of possibility. The Broken Spur Ranch sprawled across the foothills 10 miles outside Redemption Creek. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains, painting the landscape in gold and amber. Eleanor's legs ached from the unaccustomed horseback ride, but she didn't complain. Vivian Calloway met them at the main house, a formidable woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that betrayed no judgment when Luke explained the situation. "You poor dear," she said, taking Eleanor's hands in her weathered ones. "Come inside and have some supper. We'll get you settled in the cabin after." The main house was modest but comfortable, with worn leather furniture and colorful quilts that gave it a homey feel. Eleanor ate her first proper meal in days, venison stew with fresh baked bread, while Mrs. Calloway discreetly asked questions about her situation. Thomas wasn't always. Eleanor struggled to find the words. "When we first married, he was kind. Ambitious. Then the drought came, and his farm failed. The drinking started after that." Mrs. Calloway nodded. "Men like that, they blame everything but themselves. The land, the weather, their wives. He believes I've been unfaithful," Eleanor said quietly. "I haven't been. I know that, dear." The older woman patted her hand. "Anyone with eyes can see you're not that sort." Luke had remained silent throughout the meal, but Eleanor could feel his gaze on her occasionally. When she looked up, he would quickly return his attention to his food. There was something restful about his presence, no demands, no accusations, just quiet strength. After supper, Luke walked Eleanor to the guest cabin, a small but solid structure with a front porch that faced the sunset. Inside was a bed with a patchwork quilt, a small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and a wash basin. "It's not much," he said, lighting the oil lamp on the table. "It's perfect," Eleanor replied honestly. After the chaos of the day, the quiet simplicity of the cabin was exactly what she needed. "Mrs. Calloway left some of her clothes for you to use," he said, gesturing to a neatly folded stack on the bed. "And there's fresh water in the basin." Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of how filthy she must look after hiding behind a water trough and riding through dusty trails. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson, for everything." He paused at the door, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. "Luke," he said. "My name is Luke." "Thank you, Luke," she amended, testing the feel of his name. "I'm Eleanor." He nodded once. "Good night, Eleanor. Lock the door behind me." She did as he asked, then sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day to fall freely. She cried for the girl she'd been 3 years ago, hopeful, naive, certain that love was enough. She cried for the woman she'd become, cautious, weary, mocked by an entire town for crimes she hadn't committed. When the tears finally stopped, Eleanor washed her face in the cool water, changed into the borrowed nightgown, and crawled beneath the quilt. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she fell asleep without fear of what the night might bring. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the scent of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation on the porch. She dressed quickly in Mrs. Calloway's borrowed dress, which was a bit large but clean and whole, unlike her own tattered garments. Luke and Mrs. Calloway sat in rocking chairs, coffee cups in hand. They both stood when she appeared. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Calloway said. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Eleanor admitted. Luke offered her his cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. "I need to head into town," he said. "Sheriff Walton sent word that your husband has been released and is looking for you." Eleanor's hand trembled, sloshing coffee over the rim of the cup. "I see. You're safe here," Mrs. Calloway assured her. "Thomas Miller won't set foot on Broken Spur land if he knows what's good for him." "I can't hide forever," Eleanor said, more to herself than to them. Luke's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to hide at all." After breakfast, Luke rode toward town while Eleanor helped Mrs. Calloway with household chores. The work was familiar and soothing, beating rugs, kneading bread dough, hanging laundry in the prairie wind. How long have you known Luke? Eleanor asked as they shelled peas on the porch. Mrs. Calloway smiled. He showed up about 2 months ago. Man of few words, but he works harder than any 2 men combined. My Albert says he's the best ranch hand he's ever hired. Where did he come from? Colorado, I believe. He doesn't talk much about his past. Mrs. Calloway gave Eleanor a knowing look. He's a good man, though. Honorable. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. I wasn't asking for, of course not, dear, Mrs. Calloway said with a smile that suggested she thought otherwise. Just making conversation. Luke returned mid-afternoon, his expression grim as he dismounted. Eleanor and Mrs. Calloway met him at the hitching post. Thomas is making a scene in town, he reported. Telling anyone who'll listen that you've run off with a lover. The sheriff's trying to keep the peace, but the town believes him, Eleanor finished. Luke nodded reluctantly. Most of them. Sheriff asked me to tell you it might be best if you stayed away for a while. Eleanor's throat tightened. She'd built a life in Redemption Creek over the past 3 years, not always a happy one, but it was hers. The thought of being exiled stung deeply. I need to get my things, she said. I have a trunk with my mother's silver and my grandmother's quilt. I can't leave them. Luke and Mrs. Calloway exchanged a glance. I'll go after dark, Luke offered. Just tell me where to find them. Eleanor shook her head firmly. Those things are all I have left of my family. I need to get them myself. After some debate, they agreed on a plan. Luke would take Eleanor to town after nightfall. They would retrieve her belongings from the small house she'd shared with Thomas, and then return to the Broken Spur until she could determine her next steps. As dusk fell, Eleanor changed back into her own clothes, refusing to risk Mrs. Calloway's dress on such a mission. Luke waited outside with 2 horses, his chestnut stallion and a gentle mare for Eleanor. Can you ride alone? He asked. Eleanor nodded. My father taught me as a girl. It's been some years, but I remember. The night was clear, with a crescent moon providing just enough light to see the trail. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in thought. Eleanor couldn't help but notice how different this quiet was from the tense silences that had filled her home with Thomas. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. You barely know me. Luke was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I know what it's like to be judged unfairly. There was a story there, Eleanor sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West had pasts they preferred not to discuss. They approached Redemption Creek from the north, avoiding the main street. Most of the town was dark, though light and raucous laughter spilled from the Silver Dollar Saloon. Luke led them through back alleys until they reached the small house at the edge of town. Wait here, he whispered, dismounting to check if the house was empty. Eleanor's heart pounded as she waited. What if Thomas was inside? What if he'd destroyed her few precious possessions in a drunken rage? Luke returned moments later. It's clear. But we need to hurry. Inside, the house was in disarray, chairs overturned, dishes smashed on the floor. Eleanor moved quickly to the bedroom, where she pulled a trunk from beneath the bed. It was untouched, likely because Thomas had forgotten its existence. She gathered a few other items: a photograph of her parents, a book of poetry, a small box containing her mother's brooch. Luke helped her carry the trunk outside and secure it to his horse. They were nearly back to the alley when a slurred voice called out, Well, well. If it ain't the whore herself. Thomas stood swaying at the corner, a bottle dangling from his fingers. In the moonlight, his face looked gaunt and malevolent. Thomas, Eleanor acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt. We're just collecting my things. Your things? He laughed bitterly. Everything you have I gave you. Not everything, she replied, thinking of the trunk with her family heirlooms. Thomas's gaze shifted to Luke. So this is him? Your cattle driver? I'm not a cattle driver, Luke said calmly. And your wife hasn't done anything wrong. My wife, Thomas spat. She's nothing but a careful. Luke interrupted, his voice low with warning. That's no way to speak of a lady. Thomas lunged forward suddenly, swinging the bottle at Luke's head. Luke dodged easily, then landed a solid punch that sent Thomas sprawling in the dirt. We're leaving, Luke said to Eleanor, helping her onto her mare. He'll sleep it off. They rode quickly out of town, not slowing until Redemption Creek was well behind them. Eleanor's hands trembled on the reins, but she felt an odd sense of closure. She'd faced Thomas, retrieved what was rightfully hers, and walked away with her dignity intact. At the ranch, Mrs. Calloway helped Eleanor unpack her trunk in the guest cabin. The older woman exclaimed over the beautiful quilt and silver serving pieces, but respected Eleanor's silence about the confrontation in town. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Mrs. Calloway said as she left. We could use another pair of hands around here anyway. Alone, Eleanor sat on the porch, watching the stars. She heard footsteps approaching and knew without looking that it was Luke. May I? He asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. She nodded, and he sat, stretching his long legs out before him. His knuckles were scraped from the encounter with Thomas, she noticed. Thank you for tonight, she said. I couldn't have done it alone. You're stronger than you think, he replied. But you're welcome all the same. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds: crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. I was married once, Luke said suddenly. In Colorado. Eleanor turned to look at him, surprised by the confession. Her name was Sarah. She died in childbirth, along with our son. His voice was steady, but Eleanor could hear the pain beneath the words. Afterward, people said I should have gotten the doctor sooner. That I was too slow to react. That I didn't love her enough to save her. That's terrible, Eleanor whispered. And untrue, I'm certain. He nodded once. I did everything I could. But the rumors spread anyway. So I left. Eleanor understood then why he'd been so quick to help her. He recognized the injustice of being condemned by public opinion. How long ago? She asked. 2 years. I drifted for a while before ending up here. He looked at her directly. What will you do now? Eleanor had been pondering that question since her arrival at the Broken Spur. I'm not sure. I have a cousin in California. She might take me in. Luke nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across his face. California's a long way. Yes, she agreed. It is. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor settled into life at the Broken Spur. Mrs. Calloway taught her to make cheese and butter, skills she'd never learned in town. She helped with cooking for the ranch hands and mending their clothes. To her surprise, she found she enjoyed the rhythm of ranch life: early mornings, hard work, satisfying exhaustion at day's end. Luke kept a respectful distance, but Eleanor often caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. They would talk on the porch in the evenings sometimes, sharing pieces of their pasts, their hopes, their observations about life on the ranch. You're good with the horses, he commented one evening after seeing her gentle, unnervous mare. Animals are honest, she replied. They don't pretend to be something they're not. Unlike people, she thought but didn't say. Unlike Thomas, who'd courted her with charm and promises, only to reveal his true nature after the wedding. Word from town came sporadically. Thomas had sold their house and moved on, some said to Wyoming, others claimed to Texas. The rumors about Eleanor continued, growing more outlandish with each telling. Now she'd supposedly run off with not just a cattle driver but an entire gang of outlaws. Let them talk, Mrs. Calloway said when she saw Eleanor's distress. Those with nothing better to do will always find someone to gossip about. One Saturday evening, Mr. Calloway announced that they would have a small gathering, nothing elaborate, just music and dancing in the barn to celebrate the end of branding season. The ranch hands cleared the barn floor and strung lanterns from the rafters. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica. Mrs. Calloway made punch that the men secretly spiked with whiskey. Eleanor wore her best dress of blue calico that Mrs. Calloway had helped her alter to fit properly. She'd pinned her hair up with extra care and even used a drop of rose water behind each ear. "You look lovely," Luke said when she entered the barn. He stood a bit apart from the others, wearing a clean shirt with his usual denim pants and boots. "Thank you," she replied, feeling unaccountably shy. "You clean up well yourself." The music started, and couples formed for a lively reel. Eleanor watched from the sidelines, tapping her foot to the rhythm. She hadn't danced since before her marriage. Thomas had considered it frivolous. "Would you care to dance?" Luke asked, extending his hand. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before accepting. His hand was warm and calloused against hers as he led her onto the floor. He moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, guiding her through the steps with confidence. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as they circled each other. "My mother insisted all her sons learn." A rare smile lit his face. "Said no woman wants a man who can't dance at his own wedding." The music shifted to a slower tune, and Luke's hand settled respectfully at her waist. Eleanor was acutely aware of his proximity, of the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to surround him. "I've been thinking," he said as they swayed to the music, "about California." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "What about it?" "It's a long journey for a woman alone." His eyes held hers steadily. "Dangerous." "I suppose it is," she agreed, wondering where he was leading. "I've been considering heading west myself," he continued. "The Calloways have been good to me, but I've saved enough to start something of my own." Eleanor's heart beat faster. "Are you asking to accompany me to California, Mr. Grayson?" "I'm asking if you'd consider staying in Montana," he replied. "With me." The music seemed to fade as Eleanor processed his words. "Luke, not as my wife," he added quickly. "Not yet. That would be presumptuous. But as my partner. I've found land for sale near the foothills, good grazing, a creek running through it. We could build something there. Together." Eleanor was speechless. It was an unconventional proposal, but one that honored her need for independence after her disastrous marriage. "You don't need to answer now," he said when she remained silent. "It's just something to consider." Before she could respond, the barn doors burst open, letting in a gust of cool night air. Sheriff Walton stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "Evening, folks," he said, removing his hat. "Sorry to interrupt your celebration." Albert Calloway stepped forward. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" "Looking for Mrs. Miller." His eyes scanned the crowd until they found Eleanor, still standing close to Luke. "There's been trouble in town." Eleanor's stomach knotted with dread. "Thomas?" The sheriff nodded. "He's back. And he's making threats." Luke's hand tightened protectively around Eleanor's. "What kind of threats?" "Says he's going to reclaim what's his." Sheriff Walton looked uncomfortable. "Been drinking heavily for days. I've locked him up twice, but I can't hold him forever without charges." The joyful atmosphere of the evening evaporated. Mr. Calloway assured the sheriff they would keep Eleanor safe at the ranch. After the lawman departed, the dancing resumed, but with subdued energy. Luke walked Eleanor back to her cabin, both lost in thought about this new development. "I won't let him harm you," Luke said as they reached her door. "This isn't your battle," Eleanor replied, though she was touched by his protectiveness. "It became my battle the moment I helped you that day in town." He reached out as if to touch her face, then let his hand fall. "I care for you, Eleanor. More than I thought possible after Sarah." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Eleanor felt tears gather in her eyes. "I care for you too," she whispered. "But Thomas is your husband legally," Luke finished. "I know." In that moment, Eleanor made a decision. "I want to go to town tomorrow. To talk to Thomas." Luke's expression darkened. "That's too dangerous. I need to end this," she insisted. "I can't keep running, keep hiding." I need to face him one last time. They argued late into the night, but Eleanor remained firm. Finally, Luke agreed to accompany her to town the next day, though he made it clear he thought it was a mistake. They rode into Redemption Creek under a cloudy sky that threatened rain. The town seemed subdued for a Sunday, with few people on the streets. Sheriff Walton met them outside his office, looking tired and weary. "He's sleeping it off in the cell," he informed them. "Been raving about you all night, Mrs. Miller. Not sure this is wise." "I need to speak with him," Eleanor said firmly. "Alone." Both men protested, but Eleanor was adamant. Finally, the sheriff led her to the cell where Thomas lay on a narrow cot, snoring loudly. He unlocked the door, allowing Eleanor to enter. "I'll be right outside," he assured her. Eleanor stood looking down at the man she had once loved, now reduced to a shell of himself. His face was bloated from drink, his clothes filthy. She felt not hatred, but pity. "Thomas," she said loud enough to wake him. He startled awake, eyes unfocused until they landed on her. "Eleanor? You came back." He sat up quickly, wincing at what must have been a terrible headache. "I came to talk," she clarified, keeping her distance. "This has to end, Thomas." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I know I've been difficult. But we can start fresh. I've changed." "No," she said gently. "You haven't. And neither have I. We were wrong for each other from the start, Thomas." His expression hardened. "It's him, isn't it? That cowboy who took you away." "Luke helped me when I needed it," she acknowledged. "But this isn't about him. It's about us. About how we can't go on like this." Thomas stood, approaching the bars that separated them. "You're my wife. You took vows. Vows you broke when you raised your hand to me," she replied steadily. "When you chose the bottle over our marriage. When you publicly humiliated me with false accusations." He flinched at her words. "I was angry. Jealous. You were cruel," she corrected. "And I can't live that way anymore." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "So you're choosing him? The whole town already thinks you're a whore. This just proves it." Eleanor refused to be baited. "I'm choosing myself, Thomas. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air between them. Divorce was scandalous, rare, especially in territories like Montana. It would cement her reputation as a fallen woman in many eyes. "Never," Thomas spat. "I'll see you dead first." Sheriff Walton appeared at Eleanor's side. "That's enough threats, Miller. One more word like that and you'll be facing charges." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'm filing for divorce, Thomas. Sheriff Walton is my witness that I've informed you of my intentions. You can make this difficult, or you can let me go with dignity." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Dignity? There's no dignity in being cuckolded, Eleanor." "I never betrayed our marriage," she said quietly. "But you did, every time you chose whiskey over me. Every time you raised your voice or your hand in anger. Every time you believed strangers over your own wife." She turned to leave, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "This isn't over," Thomas called after her. "You belong to me." Outside, Luke waited anxiously. His face flooded with relief when he saw her emerge unharmed. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it was true. Facing Thomas had been difficult but liberating. "I told him I want a divorce." Luke's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's unusual." "So am I," she said with a small smile. "At least according to this town." They walked together down the main street, aware of curious eyes watching from windows and porches. Outside the general store, Mrs. Peterson stood with several other women, their conversation dying as Eleanor approached. "Good morning, ladies," Eleanor said politely. Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "Is it? I think you'd be ashamed to show your face in town, Mrs. Miller." Eleanor felt Luke tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. I have nothing to be ashamed of, Mrs. Peterson. I've committed no sin except perhaps in staying too long with a man who didn't value me. And now you flaunt your new arrangement, another woman commented, eyeing Luke with disapproval. Mr. Grayson has been a gentleman and a friend when I needed both, Eleanor replied. More than I can say for those who were quick to judge without knowledge. Luke stepped forward then, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Mrs. Miller is the most honorable woman I've ever known. She's endured hardship and cruelty with dignity few could manage. She's the only one I'll ever love, and I don't care who knows it. A collective gasp went up from the gathered women. Such a public declaration was shocking enough, but to direct it toward a married woman was scandalous beyond measure. Eleanor's heart soared at his words. He loved her. Despite the rumors, despite the complications, despite her status as a married woman seeking divorce, he loved her. Luke, she whispered, unable to say more. He offered her his arm. Shall we, Mrs. Miller? With her head held high, Eleanor took his arm and walked with him past the whispering townspeople. For the first time since the rumors began, she felt not shame but pride. Pride in her decision to leave a destructive marriage. Pride in Luke's unwavering support. Pride in herself for finding the courage to begin again. They left town with plans to return the following week to begin the divorce proceedings. The legal process would be lengthy and possibly ugly, but Eleanor was prepared for the battle ahead. At the ranch that evening, they sat together on the porch of Eleanor's cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Did you mean what you said in town? Eleanor asked softly. About loving me? Luke turned to face her, his expression serious. Every word. I know the timing is wrong. I know you're still legally married. I know we haven't known each other long. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Eleanor reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. I love you too, she admitted. It terrifies me, but it's true. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. We'll take it slowly. Do things properly. And if the divorce isn't granted? It was a real possibility, given the conservative nature of territorial courts. Then we'll go somewhere it can be, he said simply. California, perhaps? Or further north to Canada. Wherever we need to go to start our life together. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a contentment she'd thought forever beyond her reach. Tell me more about this land you found. The one near the foothills. As Luke described his vision for their future, a modest house overlooking a creek, horses grazing in meadows of wildflowers, perhaps children someday, Eleanor closed her eyes and allowed herself to hope again. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Luke beside her, she felt equal to whatever challenges might come. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Eleanor stood beside Luke in the parlor of the Broken Spur Ranch. Her divorce had been granted after Thomas failed to contest it, having left the territory for parts unknown. The scandal had faded, replaced by newer gossip about the banker's son eloping with a saloon girl. Eleanor wore a simple white dress adorned with lace Mrs. Calloway had saved from her own wedding gown. Luke was handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face as they spoke their vows before the circuit preacher. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. Luke cupped Eleanor's face gently in his hands, his eyes conveying all the love words could never fully express. As their lips met in their first kiss as husband and wife, Eleanor knew she had found her true home, not in a place, but in a person who saw her for who she truly was and loved her completely. That evening, in the small cabin Luke had built on their new land, Eleanor Grayson stepped into her husband's embrace, finally free of the shadows that had haunted her. Outside, the Montana sunset painted their world in golden light, a promise of brighter days to come. No regrets? Luke asked as they stood on their porch, watching the first stars appear. Eleanor shook her head, leaning into his warmth. None. I was the cheated wife once. Now I'm just yours. And I'm yours, he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of all their tomorrows.